that are part of your hybrid cloud strategy. Planning for costs is also a key factor for most organizations. And to make it really easy to plan for Windows Azure cloud costs, you can take the map output that we saw as part of the Windows Azure VM readiness assessment and plug that data into our Windows Azure pricing calculator. The pricing calculator is available on windowsazure.com. It's very granular. It allows you to plan out varying sizes of virtual machines running either Windows or Linux workloads. It allows you to plan out your storage costs. It allows you to plan out your network bandwidth costs. So it becomes very easy to take the data that map outputs, plug it into a calculator, and be able to come up with a rough order of magnitude cost for moving forward with placing some of your workloads on Windows Azure, freeing up your on-premises data center resources then for your more mission-critical resources that really have a need to run in your on-premises data center. As you're comparing public cloud platforms as part of your hybrid cloud strategy, you may also be very interested in researching the report that was done by an independent cloud analyst firm, Cloud Spectator. Back in June of this year, Cloud Spectator spent a week analyzing the cost and performance of 5 major cloud providers: Windows Azure, Amazon EC2, HP Cloud, Rackspace, and SoftLayer. They ran the same general workloads across all of these cloud providers and used an industry standard Unix benchmarking tool to test and drive the performance of each of those workloads across each of those clouds. The results that are available at their site, at Cloud Spectator's site in their full report, were quite interesting. I've got a few of the results summarized. What they found in terms of Windows Azure is that Windows Azure they found to score 3 times higher than Amazon EC2 did on average from a performance standpoint. And in terms of Rackspace, they found that because of Windows Azure's lower cost, that it provided 5 times more value than Rackspace did in their testing on average. So some really good information on comparing these various cloud platforms from Windows Azure to these other clouds. You can find the full details at Cloud Spectator's site in their full study. Now certainly analyzing the cost of a hybrid cloud solution is much more than just the cost for running resources on that cloud. It's also more of a total cost of ownership analysis that includes ongoing operating costs and other management costs as well. In addition to our pricing calculator, our data center team also has produced a total cost of ownership, or TCO, analysis tool that you may also find useful during your planning stages. The TCO analysis tool allows you to put in the inputs that relate to your current environment and your plans. So whether you're currently leveraging Microsoft or competing virtualization technologies, you can select if you're looking to add new virtual machines into that environment or migrate existing virtual machines. You can specify whether you want it to focus on strictly a private cloud implementation or if you're interested in a hybrid cloud deployment as well, where you'll be leveraging public cloud platforms alongside of your on-premises private clouds. And you can put in details pertaining to how many virtual machines, what percentage would run on premises versus in a public cloud, and general parameters around the salaries of IT management teams within your organization at a general level, so that it can produce an analysis of the total cost of ownership for our solution in the hybrid cloud space versus competing solutions. So it's a great tool. You can access it for free using datacentertcotool.com. So we've talked a bit about geographic diversity, assessing our current environment, planning from a cost standpoint. Compliance, when we're talking about the hybrid cloud or the public cloud, also becomes an area of concern, and our Windows Azure team has been deeply working with several organizations to help address compliance requirements for many common organizations and industries. We currently support compliance around the ISO IEC 27001 2005 standard, SOC 1 Type 2, SOC 2 Type 2, the Cloud Security Alliance standards, FedRAMP, and HIPAA. And you can find the full details around our compliance across each of these areas out at the link listed on the slide in our windowsazure.com Trust Center page. And then from compliance, the other concern that comes up is availability and service level agreements when we're dealing with hybrid and public clouds. Service level agreements are something that is part of your planning process. Regardless of which public cloud platforms you're looking at, you'll definitely want to dive into the details, spend some time understanding the unique ways that each public cloud provider measures service levels and sets their availability guarantees. We have, from a Windows Azure perspective, a very strong SLA. We provide a 99.95% monthly service level agreement for virtual machines that are configured appropriately on Windows Azure in an availability set. That translates to about 4.5 hours of downtime per year. So it's a very strong uptime measurement. Now you may have already looked at some of the other service level agreements from other cloud providers, and you may have noticed that many of them also have quoted 99.95% availability. However, again, dive into the details. You'll find that many of those other cloud providers are actually measuring their SLA on an annual basis instead of a monthly basis, which permits them a much longer continuous downtime window when they do have issues. We measure ours on a monthly basis to have much better seasonality of how our service level agreements perform against realistic application workloads that you have running on Windows Azure. You'll also find that many service level agreements are from competing platforms are written to exclude interesting scenarios like bugs or antivirus problems, malware, security attacks, hardware outages in their data center. We have that basically attempts to include everything that's within our control, from data center hardware failure to data center network or power failures. Hardware upgrades, software maintenance, planned maintenance are also included in our SLA. A lot of other competing SLAs don't include that. The items that aren't included are basically the items that are outside the control of our Windows Azure team. So items that affect guest operating system and applications, patching and updates and whatnot. Those are all taken care of by IT pros as the customers that are running those applications on Windows Azure, as well as connectivity that's outside the perimeter of our Windows Azure data centers, either customer network failures or intermediary internet provider failures or internet backbone failures. So those are not included because they're outside of the control of our Windows Azure team. You can find the full details of our service level agreements out on windowsazure.com, and I definitely, again, as part of the planning process, encourage you to download those SLA documents and have someone on your team go through them very carefully in comparison to any other public cloud providers that you may be evaluating, to make sure that you can do a good comparison of what we're guaranteeing versus what many of those other cloud providers are guaranteeing. In addition to availability, portability is another consideration that I see many customers looking at, because in today's age, even though we may be running certain applications in one public cloud versus another or on premises, there's no guarantees down the road that our business requirements won't change, and we may be finding ourselves needing to move those virtual machines to a new location, a new hosted cloud, back on premises, or up to Windows Azure, for instance, based on changing application needs. With our hybrid cloud solution, if you're running Windows Server 2012 or 2012 R2 Hyper-V as your virtualization layer on premises, you'll find that Windows Azure supports a compatible virtualization layer up in the Azure cloud, compatible with Hyper-V on premises, allowing you to have on-premises workloads that are already virtualized as virtual hard disks be easily transported up to Windows Azure or back, or easily transported to hosting cloud providers that are part of our Cloud OS network and back, giving you the choices to be able to easily move those workloads back and forth between your location and cloud, other public or hosted cloud locations at will, to address any of those changing business requirements. Now, if you're using a different virtualization platform, either in your private cloud or in your public cloud, you may find the links that are listed at the bottom of this slide to be handy. I've got two step-by-step guided labs that you may be interested in. One that walks through migrating cloud-based VMs that are running on the Amazon AWS cloud over to Windows Azure, and one that targets VMware VMs that are running in an existing private cloud environment, an on-premises data center, using VMware as the virtualization layer, migrating them over to a virtual hard disk that can be moved either to Hyper-V on premises or to Windows Azure or a hosted cloud provider that is using Hyper-V as well. So some great additional resources for being able to move to a standpoint where you have portability of your virtual machines across private clouds, public clouds, and hosted clouds. And then finally, as part of our initial planning criteria, hybrid cross-premises networking also oftentimes comes into play, where you may have an existing on-premises private cloud of resources, and rather than only running public-facing, web internet-facing applications up on your public cloud platform like Windows Azure, you may want to leverage the resources that are part of Windows Azure, part of that public cloud platform in our global data centers. You may want to leverage those resources as really an extension, a secure extension of your on-premises network. And that's where Windows Azure provides virtual networking. So I would definitely make sure as part of your planning that you check out the site-to-site virtual networking capabilities of Windows Azure, as well as any other cloud platforms that you're evaluating. Windows Azure's virtual networking allows us to define up in the Windows Azure cloud an isolated virtual network that has one or more subnets used to organize our cloud-based VMs that are running on the Windows Azure platform. That isolated virtual network makes sure that all of the virtual machines that are part of that virtual network are partitioned off from any other virtual networks running in your Windows Azure subscription or other customers' Windows Azure subscriptions. So it's a secure isolation layer. In addition, Windows Azure virtual networks also include built-in support for VPN gateways, so that you can establish site-to-site IPsec VPN tunnels back to your on-premises environment, and at that point be able to route out to Windows Azure as though it's another data center location on your wide area network. Once that site-to-site IPsec VPN tunnel is up in place, all of your on-premises workloads will view that new subnet, the new set of subnets up in your Windows Azure virtual network as simply another branch location, another data center location on your wide area network. If you're interested in learning more about Windows Azure site-to-site cross-premises networking, at the bottom of the slide I have a link to a guided lab that you'll find very helpful in better understanding the process for building secure site-to-site cross-premises connectivity to Windows Azure and leveraging that as part of your hybrid application workloads that you're running between your on-premises private cloud and public clouds that are running on the Windows Azure platform. So be sure to check out that VNet Cloud Lab link as part of your planning process to learn more about cross-premises networking. Now, we also talked about management tools. And System Center 2012 R2 is our management tool set that provides the ability to